Great to have you on the podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Let's kick things off. Would love to first, this is your first time coming on the podcast, so would love for you to first tell us about yourself a little bit and then give us a general overview of genomics.
Great. So I'm Sir Peter Donnelly. I'm the CEO and founder of Genomics. I'm Australian originally. I grew up in Brisbane, did an undergraduate degree there. I was lucky enough to get a Rhodes Scholarship, so I went to Oxford and studied for a doctorate in mathematics. And for most of my career, I worked in the academic world, initially in mathematics and statistics. And then my interest moved into genetics and understanding the genetic basis of all the common human diseases. And I was lucky enough through doing that to be right at the center of an extraordinary period of discovery in the science. People sometimes call it the genetic revolution, when from about 2004 onwards, for the next decade or so, there was a transformation in our knowledge of which bits of our DNA impact our risk for all of the common diseases. I was lucky enough to be in some of the major international projects. The HapMap project, which followed on from the Human Genome Project. I led the large UK Welcome Just Case Control Consortium, which was one of the landmark studies. We studied about 16 diseases in about 70,000 people. And in my academic role, also worked on getting the new sequencing technologies into clinical medicine. And that led to a large program in the UK involving 100,000 people, which the government led. So as an academic, as I said, almost all of my career, we founded Genomics, the company, in about 2014, because we could see huge potential for the progress we'd made in the science to impact on people's lives and the way healthcare worked. But actually, none of that was happening. So we realized it was necessary to found the company to keep doing outstanding science, and I like to think we have, but then to put the pieces in place to take advantage of those scientific discoveries so that we could get better at predicting, preventing, and treating diseases. And that's what we've done in the 10 or so years since.
Some of the highlights congratulations. It's very difficult to have a business. It's another thing to have it for 10 years, right? And be building and continuing to still wake up every day energetic, which tells me you love it. This is anyone that hasn't started a business before, I always say, like, they think that you get all this free time but you would not be doing it if you did not love it. Like, you have to absolutely love it or you would find something else to do. So, like, talk me through some of the highlights over that 10-year period that really stand out when you think back over building this business.
Yeah, I'd love to. And just to say, your description is absolutely right. It's a tough gig running a company, and you need to want to do it and be driven. And for me, it's a big change from the academic world. There are some things which are in common, and it's an advantage for me that I understand our science as well as I do. I also love learning things. And as you know, there's an awful lot to learn when you are involved in a company, which has been great. In terms of highlights, one enduring highlight is the caliber of people I'm lucky enough to work with. You know, from the earliest days of the company, my co-founders, those who joined us at an early stage, to the company now, which, you know, over 10 years of evolution is rather different. We have incredibly high caliber people, and they're a joy and an honor to work with. So that's an ongoing highlight. What we do as a business is we've built a very large genetic data resource, one of the largest of its kind in the world, I think, and unique in many ways. And then we develop algorithms which can analyze that data to help in two different ways. One of them is in the drug discovery process, so we can help drug companies find new drug targets or validate drug targets they're interested in. And then when they're further along, we can help them find the right patients who'll benefit from a particular new proposed therapeutic drug. And then the other piece of what we do is about understanding risk for human diseases, and I can come back and talk a bit about that. But over the 10 years, some of the early highlights were the success in building the data resource and getting the methods. I remember the first time we had a commercial contract that was incredibly exciting for us. In the last couple of years, we've had major commercial traction, and just to be able to meet revenue targets, grow the revenue, we've roughly doubled revenue each year for the last 3 or 4 years. Another big set of highlights are around funding milestones. Getting early on in the company's history, it was relatively, it was never easy, but it was easier than it is now to raise money. But our last funding round, which was 18 months ago, was in a very tough market. And to come through that, to have strong support from our existing investors who are brilliant, and to get new investors involved, that's another massive highlight and a big milestone for us.
What our audience should know about genomics in general and also genetic risk testing.
Yeah, I'd love to. One way to set the context is the following. Until a couple of years ago, if I had the entire DNA sequence on someone who was, say, 40 years old and healthy, I'd learn something medically actionable only in about 1 or 2% of cases. And that's because genetics has played into medicine through rare diseases, which are typically caused by a single change, a letter in our DNA, which has a very big impact. So diseases that people will probably have heard of, like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's disease or muscular dystrophy, are examples of that. Now, those conditions are individually rare. They're often very serious. They're collectively relatively rare. And most of them affect people when they're very young, often in childhood. So if you get to age 40 and you haven't had any of those symptoms, there's not much to find of that kind left in your DNA. But now it's the case that if I have genetic information on a healthy 40-year-old, we can learn something medically actionable in about 70% of cases. And that change from the 1 or 2% to the 70% is because we've developed the way to measure the genetic part of our risk for all the common diseases, for heart disease, for diabetes, for breast cancer for women, prostate cancer for men. They're the diseases which use 70 or 80% of healthcare budgets, and they cause most of the sickness and mortality in our populations. So it's that change from the focus of genetics on rare diseases, where it's becoming more and more powerful, and there has been huge and really exciting progress. But the change to enter the mainstream of common diseases, which has been vital. And we can now, for each individual, through a relatively straightforward genetic test, we can determine their risk for 5 or 10 or more common diseases. Each of us will be at high risk for some of those diseases. Those genetic risks, which we can now measure, aren't correlated with the things we can measure. They're not correlated with clinical risk factors. They're actually not very correlated with family history. So each of us is at high risk for 1 or 2 or 3 diseases. We have no idea what they are, and neither do our doctors. So the big potential is in making people aware of what their particular risks are and what they can do to avoid those. I like to talk about making them co-pilots in their health journey rather than passengers, but also making health systems aware, because health systems have screening programs, they have prevention programs, and this enables them to get the right people into the right programs at the right time.
So who can specifically, obviously the audience can make some general assumptions, but who can benefit specifically from genetic risk testing?
Well, almost everybody, in the sense that we'll all be at high or increased risk for some diseases, but we just don't know what they are. And if we know younger in life when we're healthy, there are things we can potentially do, but also there are things our health system can do. They can, if it's different in different systems, many systems, for example, offer screening for breast cancer for women when they get to a certain age. But actually, there's a massive difference in risk across women of that age because of their genetics. In a sensible world, the women who are at higher risk would start their screening earlier, mammograms, for example, and those who are at lower risk wouldn't need to start until a bit later. So it's better for the women involved if those programs, like screening programs or prevention programs, it's better for the individuals if they're targeted on the basis of risk, and it's much better for the health systems because they're using their resources more effectively.
So what's holding us back? I have a phrase I love of do the obvious, right? And it's amazing how much it can apply across life. And then I interviewed recently Obvious Ventures, which I think is such a cool name for a venture capital firm. But we were just talking about like the best ideas. This doesn't just have to be healthcare, right? In hindsight, they just seemed obvious. And everything that you're saying, which is how I know it's great when it seems like something obvious we should do. Doesn't mean we do it, but like that makes total sense. So what's continuing to hold us back from that being the case across the board of we know that this person is has a higher likelihood to have a specific disease because it's in their genetics. Um, and to get them in for screening early, because I had a talk with someone and we went through a lot of like different diseases and things like that, and it's truly incredible how much is curable, or like you can at least mitigate how serious it's going to be if you catch it early.
Absolutely.
And so much just seems to be caught late, and then we have some issue, right? So like, I know that's a really long question. It bounced around a couple places, but like my thing is like, continue. What is holding us back from this becoming the norm for everyone, that to get like early testing and to stay in front of their health versus kind of getting to that, what do we need to do to fix something that's already broken versus trying to fix it before it fully breaks?
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously, I completely agree with you. And many people have talked in different countries, including the US, about how important it is to shift healthcare leftwards, to move it from late stage care to prevention. That's the way to make health systems more sustainable. And this is, I think, an absolutely critical and really powerful way to do that. Why hasn't it happened already? I think there are a couple of pieces. One of them is it's relatively new science, and so it's not widely enough known, and people don't see the potential. Another one is, and this differs in different parts of the world where healthcare systems are run in different ways. But in a US context, for example, first of all, um, in a model which is about being reimbursed for interactions with health systems, although prevention is seen to be important, it's not always incentivized the right way. In a model where people change their health insurers regularly, you have to work harder to get the ROI right in investing in prevention. But there are other routes to doing that. We have a program in the US with one of the largest life insurers, for example. It's not at all about using genetics to decide who to insure. We and our partners, the life insurers, think that's inappropriate. But once someone has a life insurance policy, roughly speaking, they're paying the insurance company a certain amount of money each month, and then the insurance company pays out when they die. If the insurance company can help that person live longer, it's obviously good for the individual, but actually it's great for the insurance company because they'll have paid more premiums before they have to pay out, and they'll have invested those premiums for longer. So that's an area actually where there's a perfect alignment of interest. The life insurance company and their policyholder are aligned. I think that's somewhere, it's kind of interesting that life insurance, which is often thought of as a rather kind of staid industry, is at the forefront of the potential of using these technologies. And it will happen in healthcare. It just needs to be more widely known. And I think there's some particular opportunities.
Yeah, it's just, it gets so frustrating when you look across the board, just like when you apply that do the obvious to healthcare, especially here in the US, right? It just seems so obvious to me to, like, we just spend so much on patients at the later stage of their life when they're already like, they already have a sickness, the they're more likely to be overweight, right, and have these additional health issues, versus like going to everyone. This is kind of separate from the genetics thing, but like if you're going to the gym X number of times and like your scale is showing this weight and these metric, like we're going to pay for your gym membership and a trainer and things like that, and um here's your food as medicine membership where we're going to get you healthy meals like if you continue to do that. And it's so funny when you talk to the like insurance, and it's just, well, that's a lot of money to pay. Like I view it as pennies comparison what would have to pay down the road if we didn't prevent. Anyway, this we could
Yes,
talk
actually,
about this.
one. Let me just
Mhm.
pick on one interesting thing. You said it's separate from genetics. Actually, it's not.
Oh,
It turns out
okay.
even for things like obesity, genetics is a major factor in determining why some people find it harder to lose weight and tend to gain weight more easily than others. Um, in our work and others, it's more important than lifestyle factors. Um, and it turns out that some people, because of their genetics, need to do more exercise. So there's a study that shows some people have to walk 10,000 steps a day more than other people just to keep their weight stable because of their genetics. So
That ma-
actually,
that makes sense.
genetics is part of all of these things, and in a sensible world, we'd know about it and we could feed it in. We could providing the additional support to the people who need it in terms of weight gain or weight loss because of their genetics.
And then
In
it
the same
impacts
way, we
that.
get the screening to the people who most need it.
If we know that information, we can
Yeah,
now offer better food options, right, based on their situation, activity, like you just said. So that makes a lot of sense then.
yeah,
Okay. So this is all part of that do the obvious bucket. And I just want to
yeah,
see that you're probably tired of hearing this stuff too, but I always hear all the time healthcare has to move a little bit slower. And I know like parts of it does, but it just gets so annoying when like I think we're putting up these additional roadblocks that don't make sense. Like if you ask me if I want to share more information, because we always talk about the data sharing and things like that, if I can get like better actions on what I should be doing with my health, I'll share that information all day long. Very rarely is that information going to come back to bite me, right? Even if it got leaked, which you don't want it to. But I just think we think that so much. Well, what if the data gets leaked? What is really in the data that if it got leaked is so like I know there is some things that could be bad, but you and I could probably talk about this. We could just have a marathon, bring a bunch of people on, and talk about this for a day straight, right? 2 days straight.
yes,
I want to make sure I switch to the next thing I wanted to ask you. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about like you work with several partners, including Vertex Pharmaceuticals, GSK, Mass Mutual, et cetera. Can you discuss how you're currently like supporting these different businesses and industries kind of across the board?
yes, and it's different for different industries.
Mhm.
The work we do with Vertex, for example, is to use genetics to help them find new drug targets. So when someone's developing a new drug, drugs effectively change some little bit of our biology. They interact with a protein and maybe stop it from doing what it would otherwise do. So the drug target is the thing you're trying to change with the drug. The industry as a whole is very bad at picking drug targets. Vertex actually have a great record. It's been shown that if you have genetic evidence that points, human genetic evidence that points to a drug target, it's more than twice as likely to succeed in a clinical trial. So some of what we do with our partners, and Vertex, for example, is to use our genetic database and the algorithms we've developed to help understand whether a particular drug target is likely to be a good one for a given disease. And you can also use genetics to learn whether if you target that protein, it might have side effects in terms of other conditions it might exacerbate. So that's one of the kinds of things we do. We also work with companies in using genetics to find the right people for drugs they're developing. There's now growing evidence from a number of different conditions that you can use these genetic risk scores to identify patients who will benefit most from a particular drug. And the partnership we announced with GSK was of that kind, looking at drug trials to see whether we could identify subgroups of people who were more likely to benefit from the drug. And we have a number of ongoing partnerships like that. So that's the work we do in the we call it the life sciences space. So with biotechs and pharma companies, we also help others by making our software platform available in a software as a service way. So their scientists and their experts can use the sophisticated tools we've developed and analyze data in the way we can. And then in parallel, there's a work we do about prevention, which is developing sophisticated tools to understand risk for individuals. Sometimes just based on genetics, but actually often, and heart disease or cardiovascular disease are examples, you wouldn't just want to understand someone's risk based on genetics. You'd also want to include their blood pressure, their BMI, their cholesterol level, and so on. So powering much more useful and efficient tools to understand risk for each individual so that we can then target the screening, target the prevention, rather than a one size fits all, get the right things to the right people at the right time.
Now, why is now time for this innovation? Why is now the time, not now time?
A number of reasons. I think, first of all, because healthcare systems across the world have a major problem. They're just not sustainable in their current form. And many people have argued that the solution, and I agree, that a big part of the solution to that is we need to get better at preventing disease. To get better at preventing disease, you need to be able to predict it better. And now we have a really powerful way to do that just wasn't there a couple of years ago. And so I think that's a game changer for us. We've done all the tests, we've done the validation studies, it's ready for prime time. And indeed, our tests are being used in the US, they're being used in the UK. Um, in the UK, through a large program, there'll be millions of people in a few years' time who know their genetic risk for diseases because of our algorithms and our technology. So it's solving a big problem, and it's ready for prime time.
Last question for you before we wrap up here. What's on the horizon for the company and the industry?
Well, for the company, we're looking to keep expanding the range of partners and customers we can help, to sort of, from the company's point of view, to grow what we do and to grow the business. I think more broadly, over the next 5 to 10 years, these kinds of things will just become routine in healthcare. And indeed, in 10-ish years' time, genetic information will often just be sitting there in someone's health records, and we'll use it in many different ways. Prevention's the natural place to start, but we'll use it in many other ways, helping work out what are the best drugs for someone when they're sick, in helping clinicians make decisions between this procedure or that procedure where the evidence isn't clear. Even, I think, in working out what the right behavioral nudges are for people to make sure they stick to their medication and so on. That'll be different for different people, and genetics will be part of that story.
I hope to see too information at an earlier age. That helps, right? The earlier that you can get that information.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love it. Let's definitely stay in touch. Love what you've been building, what's already been built, and wishing you and the team all the best of luck. But thanks for
Jared, thank you very much. I've
yeah.
really enjoyed the conversation.